Thank you for coming. I welcome you here on behalf of the Space Walk of Fame Oral History, and we're glad to see you fellas. Vern here I worked with. Sometimes I thought I worked for him on Pad 19. Vern was our mechanical propulsion lead engineer, and he was so germane to getting this program going and keeping it going as far as the mechanics and the propulsion guys were concerned. Why don't you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Floyd Criswell, and I worked Mercury and Gemini. Missed out on the first launch of Mercury because I got to the Cape, been at Wallops Island on a test launch for the escape system for Shepard. So I got to the Cape just a few weeks before Grissom was launched, and of course I lost the spacecraft at that time. So I stayed completion of Mercury and all the way through Gemini. So,
were you working for McDonnell?
yes,
Yeah,
McDonnell, before it became McDonnell Douglas even. And so I worked there and was sent to California on a project later on at the end of Gemini, and worked on government vehicles, unmanned vehicles. So I completed my whole career in California.
Yeah. Okay, Ron, give us a thumbnail sketch of your background.
38 years with McDonnell Aircraft, then
Okay.
McDonnell Douglas.
Okay.
Primarily advanced development. I started Gemini on a company-funded study called Mark II Mercury, which became Gemini.
Yeah.
And I guess I supported 3 NASA panels: T&O, trajectory and orbits, aborts, and crew procedures.
Was most of your work back in St. Louis?
Almost all of it in St. Louis.
All
but
of it in St. Louis.
we were joined by Gus Grissom 2 or 3 days every other week because he insisted on knowing every little detail about the system.
Yeah.
And how he would detect a malfunction and what he would do about it. So the unsinkable Molly Brown seemed to work perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've been reading a little bit of the history, of this, and originally the Gemini program started out to be a Mercury 2, and of course it grew from there and later became Gemini.
It continued on because the Air Force needed something for their manned orbital laboratory.
Yeah.
So we worked Gemini V, which basically was the same vehicle with a door cut through the heat shield.
Yeah, yeah. And is it true that Spacecraft 2 was actually launched twice?
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, well, we heard that yesterday, that Spacecraft 2 was launched twice. The second time, they had actually cut that door in the heat shield, and this was an Air Force launch. I believe it must have been launched from Vandenberg.
Vandenberg.
Yeah.
I heard.
For surveillance.
Heard it didn't work on that particular one.
So Ron, were you down here for the launches then?
One.
Which one was that?
I guess it was 10.
Okay.
John Young.
Yeah, he flew later.
Been a long time ago.
I have it here, of course. But most of your work, though,
In St. Louis.
there in St. Louis.
Right.
Yeah. Or do you live in that area now?
Still.
Yeah. So you had 38 years when you quit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right out of the Air Force into McDonnell Douglas.
Yeah, right.
Into McDonnell Aircraft.
McDonnell Aircraft, right. You, of course, knew Luge, right?
Yeah.
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 Luge was our official. He was a good man. He
Yeah.
was a good man.
Yeah, he stayed on with the missile plant that was down here then. in
Yes.
Titusville.
Yeah. But he lives in Missouri now, right? So did you support the launches in any way when you were back in St. Louis?
Only from the standpoint of the aerodynamic and trajectory analysis and
Okay.
preparation of the launch, not
Yeah,
present
so
on site.
Each launch was unique from the point of view of trajectory and all the events that went along with the flight.
Right. We did a lot of work on Gemini because with the offset CG you had some lift vector,
Yeah.
so you could actually control where you touched down.
Oh, yeah, right.
And we defined some contours, but Chris Kraft said, hell no, I don't want those astronauts playing with that. It's enough trouble finding them anyway.
Was McDonnell trying to develop the Rogallo wing, or was that somebody else that had that job?
We supported aerodynamically.
Okay. But somebody else had the job, right?
Well, the fabrication and deployment of it, yeah. Now, I forget, was it Pioneer or some parachute company?
I don't know.
Did the work on it. But it was lagging.
Yeah.
So
well, that's what got it canceled, I think, don't you?
Yeah. And that's probably one of the factors on putting ejection seats in instead of an escape tower. Because if you thought you were going to land a Rogallo wing, something malfunctioned.
On the individual launches, did they send? Did you go down to Houston, for example, to help them out down there during the actual launches?
Again, I supported 3 of the panels down there.
Yeah. Okay. We might have met each other down there. We occasionally sent somebody from the launch vehicle group down there, and of course we had guys from Baltimore who came down, and we had one guy that was called a slow malfunction guy, and what it was on the slow malfunction, a malfunction is where it was just drifting off, or something like that. It would not be enough to cause an abort, but have human intelligence in on that.
Sure. Again, Grissom was really the engineer. He spent days on the simulator to get down perfect. He could fly the retro without autopilot.
Yeah.
And that's not easy.
No, right. So, what's some of the memorable missions that you remember?
Well, see, one point about that slow malfunction, we had something, I was in the electrical group, something called smart shorts. You had a short that wouldn't blow the fuse, but it's a problem. It wouldn't blow the fuse, but it might heat the wires up and cause a problem. They call that a smart short as opposed to a dead short.
Yeah.
So we had certain categories on those things.
Okay.
But you asked about the launches. I was in the blockhouse for about the last half of Mercury launches and all of the Gemini launches. I may have been one or two exceptions. But when Lovell and Schirra had the shutdown on the pad, I was in the blockhouse. I remember I was on a recorder console right in the work area there, but we could see the monitors, the television monitors, and when it lit off, it's like you struck it and it looked like dust particles or moisture particles just fell, and there was the puff, and then the puff went away and dead silence, and Schirra said, oh, that's all he said. And so our guy on the console, on the electrical console, was Ken Metz, I remember his name. He disabled the pyro buses in the spacecraft so nothing else could happen.
Okay.
But he couldn't disable the escape
Ejection seats.
ejection seat because that had a percussion type shot, like a shotgun shell, no electricity involved.
Okay.
So you had to pull it, and all he said was, oh, and then they told Schirra the problem, and then Walter Cronkite reported on the news that night that he said, oh, shucks. Of course, we in the blockhouse didn't say shucks.
No, of course not.
But it wasn't available to the public. They didn't have the line going out to the press and all that.
Right.
So he had to stay, he and Lovell, Stafford. They had to stay about 2 hours in the spacecraft before we get them out, and they were getting kind of irritated. It's taking so long. It's a procedure you have to go through and so forth.
Yeah.
But that was I remember that launch more than any.
As I recall, that was the one the procedure called for use of the ejection seats.
Yeah,
But he didn't.
He was.
The mission rules call for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, he's cool enough to not do anything because he had a fighter pilot background,
That's right.
which I think are the best astronauts are ex-fighter pilots,
Yeah.
and always will be, because they've been through emergencies, they did it right. So I always felt that, I've been asked, was he the best astronaut? I always thought he was the best astronaut because he was cool, as he proved. He conserved his fuel on board. He gave a intelligent narration as he went. It wasn't just somebody on a lark, somebody just enjoying the ride. He was an engineering astronaut. I always felt he was one of the better astronauts. They're all good, but he was really
he was good. Yeah. Of course, he flew on Gemini 3, which was the first manned Gemini that we flew. Now, Vehicle 1, as you recall, it was nothing but a boilerplate for you guys, but it was all-up launch vehicle for us, and then Vehicle 2 was an all-up instrumented spacecraft for you guys, but nobody on board. And then Vehicle 3 was the first manned vehicle. And we had the guy here today, just right before you got here, who actually punched the button on that. I'm trying to remember, Vern, when you came aboard. Who was the guy that you took the place of? Was it Al Hopkins? Or?
I don't remember.
Don't remember? Okay. I think you came over about Launch Vehicle 3. I think you came over about that point in time and took over. You had been on Titan 2, hadn't you?
It was Titan 1, and I started with the first Titan there. It was the rocket ranch when it first got started. I got an offer. They were looking for experimental aircraft types.
Down here in Florida.
Yeah, and I had worked for Ivor Sikorsky there. We built the first helicopter, and there was nothing that was available up there in the aircraft industry, so they gave me and the family, they gave us a 2-week vacation if I would come down and interview for a job at the Cape. So I came down, I interviewed, and I got the job. And there was not a house to rent or to buy in the whole area at the time. So they gave us a 3-bedroom apartment on the base. We lived on the base until they started building. I guess it was about 8 or 9 years before they started building in the area where you could buy a house. And so we lived there, and I started on the old Snark missile. And I worked through the Snark until we finished that. And then fortunately, Martin was coming up then, so I got a job with Martin. And it seems like every time that we completed a project out there, we were fortunate. We got laid off, but we were fortunate in getting a new job because there were other companies with new rockets coming out there, and we got to work for them. So I went to work for the Martin Company, and then I worked on the Titan, and through that, and then I ended up on the Gemini because they needed help there. But I learned early in life that you got more work and better work with happy people. So I developed all kinds of different things to make people smile, make them happy while they were working, and what have you, and it seemed to work out because they did a good job.
Now, when you came over to Gemini, you had worked for Frank Carrier before, hadn't you?
I worked with him. I don't think I ever worked for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Frank was instrumental in getting you over there, I think.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, I think
oh,
so,
I wasn't
yeah.
aware of that. So,
And
yeah.
I had never met you at that point, but when you came over, things really started to fall into place a lot better at that point in time.
I see.
Yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
telling him something he doesn't know here.
Well, like I say, I mean, I developed a lot of things that would make people smile, keep them happy, because, like I said, I mean, I've got more work and better work with happy people. Made a difference.
One of the things that keeps coming up here, and it's come up today and it came up yesterday, did you fellas, after the Gemini program, did you go on and use your experience on the Apollo program?
No, no. McDonnell only had the ohm system, and of course,
That was all on the Apollo?
yeah. Well, the S4B stage was built by Douglas.
Yeah, but that was populated with some people from California, right?
Correct. Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
Went through several phases of space shuttle.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I run into a lot of guys that I knew when we first started the shuttle thing again. But one of the things that I wanted to bring out is I would say 90% of the people who worked on Gemini were able to translate that experience directly over to some of the other contractors. And Vern here is a good example. He went from Gemini right over to who was the guy? Northrop? No,
it was Grumman. Grumman aircraft.
Grumman that built the limb. And,
Yeah, we put all the guys on the moon and brought them back.
Yeah.
That was the important thing, bringing them back.
Well, I did stay with McDonnell, which changed to McDonnell Douglas soon after. But I was assigned to California on a unmanned military project, which we launched at Vandenberg Air Force Base and worked out of Sunnyvale. So they had a small group of McDonnell people with Lockheed on this project.
Okay.
So I stayed 17 years out there as
really?
McDonnell Douglas, getting the check out of St. Louis and not once going back to McDonnell in St. Louis in the whole 17 years.
Is that right?
So we had a small group out there. So we launched about 10 vehicles spread over the 17 years of big military vehicles. And so I did put the experience I gained in the two programs here, Gemini and Mercury, in that.
Yeah.
And so I reached the 27th year with McDonnell, but that program ended after 17 years out there in California. And so we had a choice. We could go to St. Louis or the Cape or various places. But I moved my wife so many times, and she was teaching, so I could retire from McDonnell and pick back right up with Lockheed, working in the same building, because I've been working around Lockheed for 7 years. So then I just continued on this program, a new, bigger version of the program out there, and stayed 13 years with Lockheed Martin at that time. So I retired out there. So I played, it was 39 years, 27 with McDonnell Douglas, and the last 13 with Lockheed Martin. So, but I worked electrical systems and test conducting on the spacecraft and all that, always in the blockhouse.
I actually spent more time in Titusville after advanced development space, because we built a plant down here.
Yeah.
We made the Army Dragon missile, anti-tank missile, and then we co-produced the Tomahawk Navy cruise missile down here.
Yeah, you all were pretty big in those days down here.
Well, that was the real nice part about the Cape, because every time we completed a project, then we were fortunate another company was coming in with another rocket, and we could move on to them.
Sure.
And I spent 35 years on the rocket ranch while I was there. 35 years and moving from company to company to keep working, and until I finally decided to retire after 35 years out there. And that was the benefit of the Cape itself. what we were doing there.
And your expertise.
Yeah.
Moving right along.
Back then, they got on the telephone. They had a project, they knew somebody's good, and they called somebody else, and they'd place somebody within the company or another company. But it changed in the latter years. This personnel department got into action with the big companies, so you had to go through all the hoops and send it out for, not bids, but publicize it and go through all that stuff. But project managers used to control getting people, and that changed in the latter years.
I got to ask you, when you were 17 years in California working without going back to the plant, did you ever feel like that you were kind of disconnected from the country?
In a way, we were. We kind of, a little bit like we're a lost colony out there.
Yeah, right. How many were in your?
About 25 people.
About 25.
And we were on the phone almost every day at St. Louis with our equivalent people back there.
Okay.
In fact, they're actually working on this project behind closed doors in that area.
Yeah.
And we would complain about raises, or they don't even know us speaking St. Louis, they say. So once a year, they used to bring somebody out of a motel in Sunnyvale, California, and we'd go to the place, motel room, and chat with the guy who was supposed our boss in St. Louis, administrative boss from back there. And so they gave us more literature and phone calls, and so it was okay. Well, I think raises and advancements and all that, we kept up with things, but it's unusual in the whole 17 years. Now, a few guys would go back and pick up the spacecraft, they called it, and fly it out, and they had family, so they'd volunteer to go, and they'd stay with family back there for a couple of days and fly back.
Okay.
But it wasn't any use for, I had no family there in St. Louis.
Okay.
So it was, it's strange how work can be done in so many different places.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was a nice part of it, was employing your ability, your knowledge in each one of those companies. So you were able to stay there and progress eventually to that.
Yeah.
And it was always interesting to work in those areas.
Yeah.
Ron, I wanted to ask you a question. Following Gemini, everybody was pretty high, and I don't know if you were part of the bid process for getting the
I reported
Apollo.
John Whitecamp. John Whitecamp had all the aerodynamic trajectory analysis, who reported to John Yardley.
Yeah, okay. And were you somehow or another involved in bidding on the Apollo?
The technical part of the proposal.
Yeah. The question I'm about to ask is everybody should have been riding very high because Gemini was very successful, you know, and then it was logical, at least in my mind, that you should have been, McDonnell Douglas should have been the people who did the CSM, you know.
I know two stories on that.
Okay, tell them.
After we did not win, we were told that NASA didn't want one contractor doing all the space work. That kind of helped us absorb the loss. And I do know that Sandy McDonnell, who was the CEO at the time, that went up for the debriefing, and a very polite gentleman, Eagle Scout and all that, said, "We never protest an award. However, by assigning us to Marshall for the booster, and assigning North American to the Space Flight Center, we felt we had a handicap all the way along."
Yeah.
Now, how much, I know that last part's factual, how much they want another contractor.
Well, the mood in St. Louis had to be bad, I think, at that point in time, didn't it?
Well, that was one of the important things in the Apollo project, is the fact that, like, when I got laid off from Martin, I went to work for Grumman, and they benefited by my experience, and I ended up as being the launch pad leader that had to watch for everything there that happened on that Apollo project.
Yeah. So you were the gunner when out there on the pad 39?
Gunner?
Yep.
Like
I went
gunner.
out there. Yep.
It was a big blow in St. Louis because almost simultaneously to losing the space effort, we lost, it was TFX, it was called then, a fighter aircraft for the tri-service. So,
Yeah.
You lost that one too?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Didn't amount to much as it turned out, but think it
See,
deployed.
when that was awarded, is my timing mixed up here? Was the award of, yes, my timing is messed up. Gemini had not yet flown when the Apollo
Initial studies.
program was started, right?
Right. It's not my recollection.
Yeah, my timing is messed up on that a little bit. So,
Yeah, there's always some concept definition phases with 2 or 3 contracts awarded.
yeah. But 8,000 people at Martin got laid off because we didn't get that contract, you know.
Yeah.
And that was in Baltimore.
Yeah, we felt as a political thing, and they try to pass the goodies around. They still do that today, I think,
Yeah.
to some extent.
There aren't many to pass it to there.
But they go through the pretense of presentations and bids, and much work goes into that.
Were you here for the launch of GLB-1, Gemini 1?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Did you go to the after hours party down in Cocoa Beach?
Well, I used to go to the parties. At first, it was McDonnell parties,
Yeah.
small parties,
Bernard Cerf.
and then it got to be larger parties when NASA got into it. And I remember the one with Glenn's launch because they built a full-size Mercury cake,
Oh, okay.
and it weighed hundreds of pounds, the shape of a Mercury,
Yeah.
and it was painted with confectioner black and the shingles, everything. So they moved it in and out of a walk-in storage as his mission was scrubbed several times. And finally they flew the mission. They had the party down there. One of the hotels, I don't know which one, they had moved the spacecraft cake outside, kind of in a dark place. And they were cutting the cake up. And I always had sharp eyes, even today, pretty good. And I could see green. I didn't see black on the outer coat. I could see spots of green. I stepped over the light. I told my wife, that's mold. So I quit eating, I told her. And everybody was munching the cake. And they'd announced they're going to give the cake to an orphanage. What's left? Well, it turned out mold isn't going to hurt you anyhow. But I remember that cake molded internally. And we were out there eating the cake.
Yeah.
John Yardley was a good party man.
Yeah, he was.
He was a good man, period. He really was sharp.
Sharp.
J.S. McDonnell was a good party man, too.
Well, but he was a Scotchman. That's kind of hard. That's kind of contradictory.
Yeah.
He's mild-mannered.
On Gemini 1, okay, the reason I asked you
I
about
didn't
that
get
is
to that one,
because Chuck Cicchetti and myself decided we were going to go out and party, so we went down there and we found a party in Cocoa Beach where Martin was, you know. Mm-hmm. But when the guys at the door, there was in a hotel down there, said, "Oh, get out of here, you bums, you know, this is for the customer," right? So I said to Chuck, we looked across the street and over at the Holiday Inn, and there was a big long line of guys standing over there. So there's a party over there, let's go over there. So we went over there, and it was McDonnell guys, okay, and we knew them from the block up.
Yeah.
So we were talking, and the line was creeping forward and everything, and so all of a sudden it occurred to me, I don't know who's giving this party, you know, it must be McDonnell. So just about that time, I was thrust into the hotel room, and J.S. McDonnell was there, and I didn't know him, you know, so I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm afraid I don't work for you, but I work for Glenn L. Martin." He says, I used to, too. He says,
Yeah, he did.
"Come on in here and get a drink."
Yeah.
That was his first job, aeronautical engineer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a good one. He was
Yeah.
ran the company as teammates, he called it.
Yeah.
And he knew on speaking terms with everybody. He knew names.
Every accomplishment was announced. This is Mr. Mack calling all the team. We used to count the us.
Yeah, I remember that.
He had a sharp mind. I think he kept getting ahead of his tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you'll forgive me for venturing off there, but I enjoyed that particular party. I just had one drink and then we left, but I enjoyed meeting Mr. McDonnell at that party.
Did you go to Bernard Cerf?
Oh, I don't remember where we went after that, but
Well, that
yes,
was
we
on-
usually went down there.
That was downtown Cocoa.
Yeah, that's right.
And everybody used to, when they finished work late at night, they'd all stop by there at Bernard Cerf, and they would get involved in that. That was quite an accomplishment for them.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you fellas. Is there anything that you would like to remember for the posterity to think about?
Remember one funny instance? I was part of our speaker bureau, and we spoke about 1, 2, 3 and the moon. And of course, we had Mercury film.
Yeah.
And you recall Ham the monkey went up, and then later on the man.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, there's always the funny things, kind of non-work things that you remember. Now, the one of the parties, they had Jose Jimenez.
Yeah.
He was here, and Carpenter had flown, and so it's one of the smaller motels downtown. I don't know the name of it, and so he sat on a stepladder on the top, pretend he is an astronaut,
Okay.
and he produced a record later about it.
Okay.
And Carpenter was down on the floor, and they talked back and forth as comedian and astronaut. and then another little thing, one time on Gemini, Martin was launching a Titan with the big solids, the big strap-out solids, because Gemini had the core but not the strap-ons.
Right.
And the core had a little rose-colored flame. You could almost see through it. It didn't have a carbon flame but the strap-ons are as big as a silo. You know, like 3 silos side by side.
Yeah.
And so a guy named Bill Bowen from Chicago, he wanted to go see it launch. So Martin was launching. It wasn't our program, but we headed out in his old Woody station wagon. He went down all the trails and palmetto bushes. We ran out a dirt road, and he kept going and going. He stopped, and a little lagoon of water there. I mean, it wasn't a few hundred feet away. Here's this Titan getting ready to launch. And back in the early days, they weren't so organized on the Cape, so they didn't have helicopters, they had air police at every intersection.
Right.
And so I thought, Bill, we're not supposed to be here. And that thing lit off, and I had binoculars I just bought to watch John Glenn's launch. And that thing started straight up, and it over our heads. It wasn't programmed to downrange. It was
Still going straight up.
straight up. And when you have trouble, straight up, they blow them up in a hurry, so they don't rain down debris.
Yeah.
And so that thing was going straight up, and all I could see was flame, just looking at the tail end of the thing going up.
Yeah.
And I thought, Bill, what are we doing here? And I looked at that Woody station wagon, and it had about 10-inch clearance under the thing. I was going to get under that thing, one way or another, if it blew up. But it kept continuing, and then it finally programmed went down. Perfect launch.
Yeah.
That was a hypergolic mixture on fuel. You see why you didn't want to stand there and look at it.
Yeah, because it's bad stuff. Well, you know, it's some of the worst stuff there is.
Is there the last thing you'd like to add to this today?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay. Well, I thank you both, all 3 of you, for coming to this, and I hope you have a good time at the reunion. And
Yeah.
don't forget